2026. It's the IPS Evening Deprogram. Phone numbers on the bottom. And if you'd like to also get on the live stream through Discord, I do have the voice chat open. And I put the link in the newsletter. If you don't have it, go to ips.monster, go to Discord, and then just click under voice channel. And there's really no vetting process. So it's immediately accessible to anybody here. I'm not a gatekeeper, although we have something of a low tolerance for what I would call MSM advocacy, mainstream media advocacy, any kind of political proselytization. And, religious discussions aren't forbidden, but we're trying to avoid getting into the realm of religion and politics advocacy, because we're looking at this as outsiders. I'm an alien anthropologist, and that's the level of objectivity that I think we maintain here because it works best. The Trutherville itself was co-opted to be part of a subset of the GOP, woke right politics, and they probably didn't sign up for that. You just want some red pills, some conspiracy theory, and next thing you know, you're part of a politicized cult. In fact, Candace Owens is trying to usurp David Icke and Alex Jones just by being more extreme and shocking in her claims. But I've described her process as very word salady. Like, she took the whole Babylon working and made it indecipherable. She garbled it. And she did the same thing today. She comes out in this podcast and she says she found a Masonic Bible and it has stuff about sacrifices and pentagrams. So she said Charlie Kirk was sacrificed by Freemasons and that Pentagon home base shaped stage he was on was the Pentagon. And she said she found a super secret Freemasonic Bible that no one else has. Well, anyway, you can buy these on eBay for $20. So the super secret book that she was interpreting for her audience doesn't really exist. But this is very low effort conspiracy slop. She's conspiracy slop. It's really not that deep, which is really too bad because she's got a platform. She could bring back reptilians, but no. But her viewers have very low standards of evidence. And I think my next video will be on standards of evidence when it comes to media consumption. The next whiteboard. I did number 2, how history is manufactured. So if you're a shield-bearing cyborg penguin member of the Blue Wrench Lodge, you can go to the member section and watch that video. I'm just trying to get comments from members first, but it goes live later for the general audiences. But the whiteboard videos are my attempts to break down the main concepts that we talk about here with infographics in a very simplistic way, so it's graspable by the noobs or by those who are semi-deprogrammed. But we're defining here a perspective on media that constitutes, in fact, a third branch. You got mainstream, alternative, and then there's this, what I term off-world stage. And this is where sane people are going to go. This is where skeptics are going to end up. There's a demand for this. There's a consumer need, media consumer need for it. Not everybody wants to be brainwashed by option A or option B. Some people don't want to be brainwashed. And there's no moral obligation to overreact to headlines. You don't have to emote every day. You don't have to feed your soul into the theater of Psy-War. You can unplug. And if you're not unplugged, you can't claim to be anti-war. I think I ended with this yesterday. I was talking about Sun Tzu, Art of War, and the famous quote, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And that's what we're living through. The populations have been subdued through mind war alone. A Gracie Mansion bomber. So there's a new bomber out. He bombed and he's connected to ISIS, the residence of the mayor of New York, which makes no sense. The right was saying that this guy was a terrorist, and they were frightened that he got elected. And this was back in November. They said it was going to bring back 9/11, and his mansion gets hit by what looks like a copy of the Boston bomber Joker Sarneff. And he's being led away, and he does the hand sign. The one that the fittest flat earther always does, the finger wagging thing. Apparently it's Islamic. Gracie Mansion bomber flashes ISIS salute to the press. The whole thing looks incredibly staged. You know, Scooby-Doo justice, what we call it. The event happens. We know why. Crime's been solved. And they unmask the bad guy before the end of a single episode. It's one of those. And it's perfectly choreographed in terms of the photographers being in the right places to get dramatic shots of all the action. And even the perp walk. The perp walk even reminds me of Mangione. And I thought there might be some connection here as well. So they're creating these anti-heroes. Like they're marketing them to the youth Antifa or something. I mean, look at the fan group that Mangione has. And they're even doing a play about him. The Mangionettes. Luigi and the Mangionettes. The Mangionettes are his female fan base. And the Joker Sarneff had the same thing. He was on the cover of Rolling Stone. And this guy kind of fits that same profile. So, in other words, it's an anti-hero. You're not meant to be disgusted by this guy or find him revolting. You're supposed to look at this guy as, I guess, some kind of class warrior, a rebel, whatever, anti-hero. All right, we are joined by Plain Decoded. Ollie Goring says, yes, Candace Slop wins. Candace Owens, however, despite my critique of her propaganda content, because it's all planted, it's all curated for her, she's one of the best at it. I mean, the #1 podcast in the world. Why doesn't David Icke have that position? Why doesn't Alex Jones? So you can't deny that she's good at what she does. But at the same time, I think what she's doing is so sloppy that it just constitutes noise, disinformation, and it's also furthering this agenda, I think, of making anybody who's not mainstream look crazy. None of her conclusions are accurate or worth hearing. I mean, she's kind of a mix of red pill and J pill. And the truth of it is, most red pill stuff is just a euphemistic way of expressing the J pill stuff. But she's in that position because she's a bridge between these worlds. In other words, you're never going to stop hearing about Candace Owens. She's going to be there forever. This is going to continue past Charlie Kirk and Erica Kirk. And her audience really is cult-like. So that's another element to it as well. She's got a target audience who lap this stuff up. Kind of like Tucker Carlson. His audience finds him credible when he says he was attacked by a demon in his bed and it left 14-inch scars and he bled on the sheets. It's like, show me the pictures of your bloody sheets, Tucker Carlson. I'm just going to trust him? I guess so. But anyway, her butchery of the Freemasonic conspiracy theory is very consistent with her other work. I'm not really that impressed. It's more like a word salad of just memes and buzzwords that probably pick up the search engine results pretty well, but she doesn't really say anything. And others have noted that she's talked about out-of-body travel, astral traveling, communicating with the ghost of Charlie Kirk. So a lot of the stuff she does comes off as somewhat occultic. Okay. Rihanna, the singer she performed at the Super Bowl a few years ago, and we talked about the significance of that performance. Her home was shot up by some crazy woman named Ivana Ortiz out of Florida who had an AR-15. And I watched some of Ivana's rants on Twitter, and she sounds pretty crazy, like a few levels above Candace Owens, like really incoherent. But apparently, I mean, this is the story anyway, she shot up the house with an AR-15. And I thought, is this real? Is this fake? Is there any reason to be suspect about it? Well, immediately I find it suspect because the celebrity in question her role in the Super Bowl halftime show. So this is a very important meme. Beyond the person, there is a meme, an archetype, some symbol. So I thought there might be some kind of meaning here or something behind it. Not quite sure. But I did note that she's about to release a follow-up to the album Anti. Rihanna is currently working on the long-awaited follow-up to the 2016 Anti, confirming in early 2026 she's back in the studio. Now, I don't know the production status or release date, but the fact of it is, I didn't know that she was producing a new album, and now I do. Her album 2016 album Anti recently hit a major milestone, spending 500 weeks on the Billboard 200. So it's 8 years. Rihanna has teased a follow-up to the 2016 Anti. Rihanna's 9th album, R9. All right, so anyway, leaving that aside, I'm just saying, we've noticed this pattern. Like Charlie Kirk dies and then his book comes out. Who is going to buy his book? Probably very few. And when it comes to these book sales from these politicos, one of the things that's pretty common is they will pay some third party to buy a bunch of books in a lot of different locations and throw them into a warehouse somewhere so they can artificially bump their rating on the New York Times. Donald Jr. did this, Donald Trump Jr., with his book. I think it was called Triggered or Owned or Own the Libs, some dumb, basically anti-left book by Donald Trump Jr. was on the New York Times, and they kicked it off. Well, they kicked it off because they recognized the system was being gamed. But what happens is you say, oh, look, the leftist New York Times is trying to censor my work. So your buyers think, oh, look, he was going to be number one and they blocked him. Standard procedure. This is how they all operate. A lot of these influencers are talking to a few people and then a bunch of bots. All right. We have Think Tank Studio Fund contribution, courtesy of Reality Witness. And by the way, I did get the mic. I noticed you gave me a mic contribution a couple weeks ago. So I have the mic, which I'm using for my whiteboards. I have a secondary camera and phone for Discord and taking calls, and of course, working on the video content. So I appreciate all the support here. The next thing that I'm really investing my time into are the publications, specifically the Great Deconstruction Work and the Charlie Kirk, Eric Kirk Squib book, which is going to also be a video. And I'd like to have it done by 3/11. I want to have something along those lines, the video, the Metascript breakdown, and a discussion about squibs. But I also want to put that fake assassination in a context that will make sense, because you have these big channels that are talking about Charlie Kirk faked it, but they're not able to put it into a context in which it makes sense, because of course it's out of bounds for them to recognize that these aren't hoaxes by a small local group, but these are operations that are conducted at the world stage level. All right, let's see. Jamarian May says, world stage actors, when all eyes should be on the 7 elders that pull the strings, all unknown names. Never heard of the 7 elders. Plain Dakota says, can a government-created mind virus naturally mutate to a different variant? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because when this channel started, I was looking at fake shootings. I was looking at the usual stuff. But I had also been doing a deep dive into symbolism, into magical traditions, mystery schools, and esoteric versus exoteric. And that's when I looked at NASA as, wait a minute, is this the pageantry for the world state church? Is this NASAtology? Are these rockets just a new iteration of obelisks? And I put out a video called Cult of the Obelisk, which I'm likely going to redo if there's a demand for it, because I have a lot I can add. I'll put that in my notes just in case, because I know someone had asked me about it. But anyway, it was at that time that NASA became criticized for the fake ISS, which I see going around. I think the Higher Side Chats just did a video on the ISS being fake. So that was coming up. And then the whole flat Earth question was being raised. And many will say the flat Earth debate was government inserted psyop to create the idea that conspiracy theorists are crazy. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's a limited hangout in order to create this false debate between real and fake, which completely misses the point over how we get our worldview. So I think this has all been a clever misdirection thing. However, this, what could have been a limited hangout, a purposeful leak to create chaos, turned into, in part, the IPS. And the reason I said infinite plane is I said they're trying to get you to commit to a model, which is going to be a straw man, however you look at it. So instead of going with that, if we're going to reject what they're showing us, then we're just going to have to go with the stance that it's infinite until proven otherwise. We need more information, in other words. So we took a skeptical, you could say shape agnostic, but or globe skeptical makes more sense, but we took a skeptical position on the matter, specifically to counter the obvious controlled opposition flat Earth society. So infinite plane society was actually meant to provide an alternative to the controlled flat Earth society versus NASA. And this position of off-world stage with regard to media is really just a reiteration of that with regard to geography. Basically saying, we've been given a false model. We don't know what's beyond all the fakeness, but we know this is fake and we can separate fake from real. And we're left with a lot of questions. We're not reaching for an alternative belief system or an alternative model. We need the information first. And what happened at that time was people got obsessed with producing the right model, arguing over minutia, and nobody was packing their bags ready to go to Antarctica. Nobody at that time was even discussing it as a viable proposition, except for one of our members who was ignored by the conference earthers, is what I called them, because it turns out the entire biblical flat earth movement just became obsessed with conferences and making money, spending hundreds of dollars to meet these content creators. It became a big grift. Plain Dakota says, what happened to your original viewers? Are some still around? Yeah, many of them, especially the ones I've met in person. But there are definitely a lot of the same people that surface here and there. And they're all going to come back. We're going to have a resurgence here. This off-world stage perspective is going to be built around the core of the IPS membership, who are the ones who over the years help refine our stance, perspectives, and methodology when it comes to how we process media. Jameer May says, the 7 elders make decisions above groups like the WEF. Everything else is narrative-driven theater. Okay. I've never heard of these 7 elders. Are they from a certain place? Are they representative of different parts of the world? How does that work? It's an interesting idea. I've often said that we don't know who's ultimately at the top of this thing. I thought the demiurge, you know, in the Matrix, the demiurge, the architect is what that means. He meets the architect of the Matrix, like Truman confronting Christoph. And, you know, the more I look into this Gnostic subtext in movies, the more it intrigues me. And interestingly, I'm noticing there to be a very pronounced rise in Gnostic thought. It's being pushed, not pushed, but it's being spread by a lot of content creators now. And this isn't Christian Gnosticism, which is a misnomer anyway. But I didn't see it coming. And what we're doing, you could describe as because I talk about it as an internalized Truman Show, because I'm making the point that this is in many ways analogous to the Gnostic concept, where knowledge sets you free, belief keeps you under control, and you're living in a false paradigm, feeding it your time, attention, and energy when you can detach from it. You can be on the world stage, but not of it. And I think these things are related concepts. And that's why I think it's so intriguing that so much of the world stage symbolism points directly to that. From the black cube, the black monolith, all this Gnostic prison stuff, breaking out of the prison. Plain Dakota says, I know 7 elders. It's the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Sun, Jupiter, Saturn. Well, a number of these magical traditions do have a number of like gods, like the 7 African powers. You can see these candles at the grocery store where it's Catholic saints, but it's like 7 African powers. The Sunday through Saturday each represent a different god, or these celestial bodies that represent God. So yes, sun. And the metals, they're all associated with metals and colors. It's really intriguing when you get down to it, because our entire system of keeping time is very much encoded with a lot of occult symbolism. Like, why do we have these days named after these Norse gods? What is with that? And if you look into what's called planetary magic in these various, again, the occult traditions of the West, they would argue that if you're going to do some kind of magic that invokes the energies of Mars, you're going to do it on a Tuesday, because Tyr, the Norse counterpart to Mars. If you're going to be more precise, you'd find the hour governed by that planet. And this is based on the Hermetic principle, as above, so below, meaning that you exist in a microcosm of the universe. And the way that you leverage power or influence through magic is you align yourself with the universe itself. There's a synchronization that has to take place in order to create some alignment with these, quote, cosmic or celestial forces. It's all very intriguing. There's a certain logic to it, but it's pretty consistent from tradition to tradition. And I've also noticed that the gods of different cultures that relate to the same luminaries, the same planets, have analogous characteristics. You can make some pretty strong correlations between like the trickster gods from Africa associated with the planet Mercury, and even the god Mercury himself, Roman god Mercurial, the trickster element, is built into it, but also them being messengers. And some will say that's because it's the closest to the sun. So it's this perfect representation of the intermediary between man and God. But the other element too is Mercury in all these traditions is the god of magic, of magical alphabets, of speech. It's like Thoth, the Egyptian version, speech, scribe of the gods, messenger of the gods. In the other traditions, this messenger thing is very consistent. Then you have the god associated with the Saturn. And if you look at various traditions with that one, there's a lot of consistencies. Saturn is basically agrarian, harvester, grim reaper, father time. And of course, Saturn in this Egyptian mythos and these other myths that are superimposed over our entertainment, Saturn rules the night. And then, of course, the sun rules the day. And so you have that constant duality, black and white. And I think it might relate to Sun and Saturn, and this eternal back and forth. And it's so prevalent in science fiction that you can kind of see how what I think they're doing is syncretism. One of the great examples of this, I think, is in Star Wars. Luke Skywalker, obviously the sun. Luke represents the sun, and Darth Vader represents Saturn and the night. And there's a lot of Saturnian symbolism built around that character, even the Grim Reaper like skull face. But the severing of Luke's sword hand, the lightsaber, well, light, life, darkness, death. And so this is symbolic of Osiris's dismemberment at the behest of Set, the Prince of Darkness. And in his dismemberment, famously, he loses his phallus. They can't find it. And that's why they put the obelisk on the grave. So the lightsaber is obviously an obelisk representation. So he loses the sword hand, and later, he gets kicked down the tunnel and he hangs from a cross. And it's sunset. The sky is like all orange red. So Luke, severed sword hand, hanging from a cross after confronting the representative of the night, Saturn. And this is followed by him getting picked up from Cloud City and then having his sword hand reattached. So that's a really succinct recreation of this mythos of the battle between night and day. And then I'm your father, the Luke, I'm your father thing, that also ties into the idea of Osiris reincarnating, essentially. How like God in the Christian myth comes down as himself. It's sort of analogous to that, where Osiris in death conceives himself again with Isis, the goddess of the night sky, who then gives birth to him, and he rises in the east as Horus. So there's this kind of idea of this self-reincarnation thing. A lot of reincarnation in the cycle of life and death encoded into all these different myths. Plain Dakota says everything, so everything does come back to that, but what, like the obelisk, what it represents is the generative principle, the active. So it's active and passive, God and goddess. And so we're looking at it, obviously the symbolism seems to point to this severed body part, but that body part represents what? Well, life, specifically the masculine side of the life force. And this is associated with, active, passive is associated with God and goddess in all these traditions. Many of the gods have horns, the symbols of fertility, but the horned gods are very common, like Pan, god of life, lust, fertility. So the generative principle, though, is more the significance here than like sex itself or reproduction, but it's more of a general principle. And I think that's what the G stands for with the Masons. Some will say it's geometry of divinity, gnosis. I think it's generative principle. But everything does come back to that, because these various mystery schools are all explaining the life force, the soul. And I think that's Lush in a sense. The idea of the incarnated soul spark. And I've seen one description of the square and compass, where the compass is 90 degrees and it represents the tool to measure the earth. Euclidean geometry, symbol of the earth, the square. And the cube and the square are symbols of the material plane, the material realm, whereas the compass is for measuring circles and the celestial. So this idea that they tell you is that, it's for measuring the earth and the sky. But another way of looking at it is the circle in the square represents spirit encased in matter. And spirit is encased in matter by the architect of the realm, the so-called demiurge. The Masons worship the great architect of the universe. They worship the demiurge. And so I think it's funny that Candace Owens is calling them satanic and evil, but she's a Catholic. It's like, well, who do you think your God is? It's the same entity. Jamarin says, could you touch on the psyop of daylight savings and leap year, how the system's off and how it negatively affects our internal clock? I don't even notice it. I'm probably not the one to ask. I've been so disconnected and detached that, like, I'm already kind of outside of time. I'm not really outside of space yet, but I've unplugged. I don't keep regular hours. I sleep as much as I feel like, or as little as I feel like. I don't notice it like I used to. I don't know if it's a bad conspiracy. I thought it had something to do with productivity, and I have no problem with productivity. I don't think it converts me to a slave, but it is interesting. You look at the clock, the clock, Chronos, like the Chronos, Saturn, the Design Authority, the Strangers in Dark City. The clock is ultimately a symbol of Saturn and the cycles, this Lord of the Cycles. And interestingly, Jeff Bezos has a $42 million clock, a big giant clock inside of a hollowed out mountain. So I see that 42, which is always associated with Saturn, and a clock. And to me, it just says that's an altar to Kronos. And this is all about time control. Time and space. And they control time with manufactured history. What's really interesting about the movie Megalopolis is that it incorporates elements of Dark City with the Strangers. They call them the Design Authority. They control time. And the main character, Adam Driver, in that movie looks suspiciously like Neo from The Matrix. And his driver is played by Lawrence Fishburne, Morpheus. So in The Matrix, Morpheus is explaining the nature of space and the Matrix, the realm. And in this movie, and it looks just like scenes from The Matrix, Lawrence Fishburne is explaining to this Neo lookalike the nature of time. And Morpheus, of course, god of forms or god of dreams. Very pertinent here. Neo, of course, the one, obvious anagram, dies for 72 seconds. Trinity resurrects him. There's a lot of Christ code in these characters, but it's not even specifically like the biblical Christ, but it's more of a Gnostic Christ. Whereas if you look at it from that perspective, you look at the individual who transcends the realm as being a Christ or an anointed, ascended, the one that overcomes the world. But again, I don't think Gnosticism is Christian, because in the Gnostic paradigm, the Christian God is the maker of this world, is in fact the creator and architect, but it is not the creator of everything. It is in fact standing in front of whatever is actually the source. So it's something of a usurper, an imposter. It's a fascinating concept. I mean, I think it looks ludicrous. Supposedly it's a lion-headed dragon. I mean, these are myths. And I don't believe in these myths as anything more than ways of describing the human experience in a very allegorical way. It's all metaphor. For example, the Garden of Eden. I think it's a cool story. It's a cool myth. But I think it makes more sense if you think about it in terms of attaining self-consciousness and the recognition of separateness from source, or quote God. And the idea of the myths always taking the person or individual seeking knowledge and turning them into the bad ones, punishing them. That's in all the myths. And I think that's an expression of how the religions of this realm reinforce the domination of the architect, which is anybody that challenges the architect is bad. Anybody who seeks knowledge to escape is bad. I was thinking about The Village. At the end of the movie, The Village, the characters who saw through it, who recognize that the elders are dressing as monsters to scare everybody so they never leave, once they've learned the tricks, they're not allowed to stay. They're given a choice. You can stay if you participate in the psyops and terrorize all these brainwashees, or you can go back and experience the 20th century. And at the end of the movie, it's pretty clear that they decide to stay in the village to serve the system. And they're elders, is what they call them, the elders. And I think El is obviously a reference to Saturn. Again, the village is one of the best descriptions of how it literally works. And interestingly, the village is surrounded by bushes with red berries. And they say, if you see that red, that's the forbidden color, you run back to the village. And that sounds to me very Garden of Eden like, in the sense that it's the forbidden fruit. And if you have it, you can't stay. Skyfish says, in Game of Thrones, there's 7 gods. I'm watching Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Yeah, that's an intriguing bit of speculation, that this place is ultimately governed by another body, and everything else below it is just theater to control the minds. And I'm somewhat in agreement with that, because I look at the internalized Truman Show and how it's a perfect match for this concept of entrapped soul sparks. And it's hard for me to separate the two, in the sense that if we are indeed living in a mass simulation to mind control billions of people in a model that specifically excludes the soul, a scientific reductionist model that removes the meaning of life and purpose, if that's what we're in, then how is that not an extension of the deeper prison for flesh itself, or of flesh itself? So we got the soul prison that has us confused that we're just the meat suit. And then as we're walking around in these egocentric meat suits, we're also mentally programmed to think there's nothing beyond this. I think one is an extension of the other. That's why I said media gnostics, because ultimately, what are we doing here? We're separating what is merely believed from what can be known, and finding that much of what is believed is not something that can be rationally accepted as true. It's not an effect. So it's sort of a leap of faith in what we can demonstrate to be lies. So you have a lot of people who are believing in a lot of lies instead of rejecting those lies and recognizing that there's actually a closed informational system that the public is trapped within. I don't know if trap's the word. I say immersed. Again, there's no platform for what we're doing. It's never existed. So what we're doing is somewhat cutting edge. And I don't think it's going to stop once the snowballing begins. I mean, once this is understood widely and why it's significant, why it matters. And I plan to make this case over the next few weeks. And this is all also just reiterating what's in the book, Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed. But I think once we have several thousand more people involved in the deconstruction project, which is undeniably based on facts, we've got receipts, we are looking at systemic fakery, it's something structural, it's not anomalous, it's built in. The more people see this, those who are at least not inclined to believe the mainstream, the more we're going to see defectors from Trutherville, from the Conspiracyville, all these people who are absorbed in the government created conspiracies. They're going to exodus. There's no reason not to. I really think this is a highly I was going to say effective mind virus in a way, but it's not even that. It's more of an operating system upgrade. And it's hard to deny that what we're saying is the right way. I mean, what are you going to do? Continue to follow the people that we are continually noticing are connected directly to PSYOPs? I mean, that should be recognized as a giveaway, that these people are working for the establishment. Find me someone who's not actually working for the establishment in any of the influencer positions out there. You know, from Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, Ian Carroll, Andrew Tate. Are any of these people actually going against the establishment? No, they're the heels. And this is best understood, I think, by looking at it as triangulation. The deliberate triangulation of left and right, the strategic triangulation, and it occurs with every single PSYOP. Every PSYOP has a split down the middle interpretation, so both sides agree it happened, but they each blame the other. This is a template, it's a pattern, and it's predictable. Lean Dion says the TV show Seventh Heaven, it's a reoccurring premise. Yeah, I've looked into this. You know, when I first got interested in these subjects, I remember noticing or being led to these systems like septarian magic, The idea of 7 entities, 7 deities, 7 planets, that's actually pretty much a consistent theme in a lot of Western occultism, this Hermetic magic. It's all based on the idea that 7, like 7 chakras, for example, that there's some kind of inherent alignment between the uh, individual and the universe, and that you enhance this alignment or you integrate your consciousness with the transcendent part of the self by engaging in these systems of ritual magic that specifically align you. This is what astrology is part of as well. The recognition of some kind of inherent alignment between what's above and what's below. We were talking about the Great Reset, 12/21/2020, and how it corresponded with the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And the timing of it was rather interesting considering what was happening in 2020. And they correlated it with a Christmas star, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on a 12/21 on a winter solstice. So that's very much also a very resetting thing if you look at it as it represents year 0. So it very much fit in with the idea of a reset. Skyfish says, it makes me think of the 7 arts, they say film or theater. Yeah, okay, I've seen that. That's actually something that's featured in the Fellowcraft second degree. Let's see if I can pull that up. The lecture in the second degree highlights the 7 disciplines: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And then you have the 7 sages of Greece. Is that the one? Thales, Solon, Bias. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. By the way, Thales, Thales. We were looking at this character before because his image is often shown holding like bolts of lightning. And he's credited with having been, I think, the first chemist, one of the progenitors of science itself, but that he also discovered static electricity. And I remember thinking his name is a very easy anagram for Tesla. So pre-Socratic philosopher, one of the 7 sages, scientist, mathematician, engineer. But anyway, I was looking at his imagery. And so you've got Tesla, and you see him in the room with the lightning, the electricity over his head. And then this guy holding the electricity, Tesla being associated with free energy. And then there's a rivalry between Thales and, let me see who it was with. That kind of reminded me of the rivalry between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. I'm going to have to revisit this. My point is like, I was suggesting that they're rebooting a lot of these characters, that there's these modern iterations of these characters that are pseudo-mythological. Maybe they're real. But anyway, you were mentioning the 7 thing. Recall David was battling against the 7 board of directors in Vanilla Sky. Yeah, so the 7 board of directors, and then Rise, the name of the magazine. And then he transcends the realm when he goes up the building. And again, this is 33-year-old David who dies, and then 3 days later is resurrected by Sophia. So it's like this Gnostic Christ story. The 7, transcending the 7, refers to, I think, rising on the spinal column, the 33 vertebrae, the 7 chakras. And in the building going up the elevator is when he was given the revelation about how everything was a simulation. And the Beach Boys song was playing, Good Vibrations. So taken together, that movie is ultimately about the transcendence over the material realm and then decision to voluntarily reincarnate. It's actually scene by scene. It's actually pretty rich with subtext. And I remember thinking it also correlates strongly with Tom Cruise himself, who is the Scientology Jesus and has this bizarre history with the number 33 already. If you look at the Top Gun, and with him, it's all sun god, solar deity, hero. And I don't know if it's true that Horus, because Horus is like a hero, fights back the night, avenges, basically he's the sun who conquers the night. So Tom Cruise plays this archetypal hero, and there's a ton of sun symbolism and 33 stuff all over his movies. Marcel says, maybe it's all BS and we should free our minds from all information. You can, but here's my take on that. The general public is misinformed. We know this. They're misinformed. Now, if you know what's going on and you recognize, hey, this is misinformation, you can separate yourself from it. So now you are informed. You're an informed disbeliever. You know why you don't believe certain things. If you just turn off your TV and you stop paying attention and you never come back, you're uninformed. You cannot argue that being uninformed is better than being informed. Because if you're uninformed, you don't have a clue. And then when the masses of misinformed are triggered to act in a certain way, you're going to be in no position to resist. You won't know who to listen to because you're not informed. So you can choose to be informed, misinformed, or under-informed, but tuning out, head in the sand isn't going to work. You can try it. I mean, you can if you already know and you don't care. Like if you don't find this entertaining, yeah, you're not going to fall back into the matrix once you've seen the way out. The only reason why you would be here is if you're interested in fomenting a culture of disbelievers that metastasizes into a third media platform, creates something of a minor marketplace disruption in alt media, costs them a lot of time, gives them a lot of headaches, and enlarges the pool of researchers that we're working with here. So if you want to aid and abet in the IPS mission, yeah, you stay here and chat and contribute. But if you're overwhelmed, by all means, go fishing. Go write a book. I mean, really, I took 10 days off. I didn't think about this once. I didn't click one notification bell. I just tuned out. And that's because I don't have an unhealthy relationship with media. I'm not addicted to doom scrolling, to reacting to headlines. It's not there. But no, you don't get the most information by distancing yourself from it. You have to be front row, cutting edge, recognizing that we have a predictive model and we can actually predict the future trends based on what we're looking at. And this is also mind war. So we are looking at what's effectively psychological warfare being waged against the public. And in that sense, there is a bit of immediacy and urgency to this. As much as I don't advocate activism, I do think it requires some active engagement to understand what's going on. If you care about situational awareness, at a minimum, I pay attention because I want to know what the masses are being programmed with, so I know what's going to happen, where this thing is going. But it's certainly a sane decision to tune out if you're not intrigued. Are you not entertained? I find this to be conspirating, entertaining, infotainment, and we're witnessing something novel. This is so novel if you think about the human experience where everybody can talk to everybody can project their thoughts into the commons. With AI now, you can actually project your imagination out there for anybody. So we're looking at this accelerant thrown into human culture, a bunch of randomness. I mean, it's a very chaotic, uh, it's almost pandemonium, this age that we're in right now. And I think we're just getting started in this process. And it actually does track with the idea of the precession of the equinoxes, the new age, the new aeons that are described by these occult societies. And I was told that the Aeon of Horus would be consistent with Aquarius and the outpouring of a deluge of information that most people would drown or be immersed in it, and that the job of the adept in this is to essentially not get overwhelmed and make use of all this newly released information. So this is supposed to be an age of blinding revelation and enlightenment. Isis unveiled. The idea of the veil being lifted. Like we're being evacuated from Plato's cave in a way. At least that's how it was sold to me. That's how it was explained to me, the New Age. And the New Agers have this concept that we're all going to wake up. But in practice, that's not what's happening. In practice, the masses are being lulled deeper into darkness while being simultaneously taught that they're now fully enlightened. But anyway, I'm all for taking long breaks just as an experiment, because you'll see that once you've upgraded your operating system, you don't need to keep up with the daily news. You've already stepped outside of their cycles and their cycles of control. And again, Saturn, the god of cycles, this is all very pertinent. You know, I think about Westworld, where the man in black with the black rimmed hat and the knife, very much a Reaper-like character. He's the one who is, you know, killing the main character every night, killing these people, and then they come back. And it's not until they start remembering the sequence of days that they break out of the cycle. So there's a lot of significance to these news cycles and how they keep us locked in. But once you've broken out of the cycles, you can take long breaks. You don't need to be immersed in this. And I don't think it's not like you have to be totally glued to the screen. I think it's nice to do it just to prove that you're now fully intellectually independent, that you don't need to be anchored in these various media entities and what they tell you to think about. That's what I experienced. The 10 days I was off were just very productive and calm. I wrote a lot. I didn't get bored whatsoever. And there was no pull. There was no compulsion to get back into it. It was almost scary how easy it could have been to have just I could have just drifted. I'm like, I'm just going to keep going and never come back to the internet. It was that easy. But then I got back into the swing of things. I went through Discord and I remembered, oh yeah, this is extremely entertaining, intriguing. It's edifying, it's educational, and we're doing something with it. Like the run-of-the-mill red pill addicts are wasting their time. J pill conspiracy theorists wasting their time, just looking dumb. They're in these cul-de-sacs, these stagnant cul-de-sacs that don't go anywhere. They're either running down these well-paved rabbit trails, following breadcrumbs planted there by feds, or they're following some ideological concern that's based on essentially demagoguery, xenophobia, and a lot of tribalism, collectivism. So they join these hives. That's a dead end. Like the only sane place to be is off-world stage or not even involved at all. But I just say that before you detach and exit and unplug, at least get the upgrade. Come to Infinite Plane Radio, get your Mind War inoculation, and then leave. Because once you unplug, it's a one-way trip. I'm saying, like, once you get out of the Matrix pod, nothing will put you back in. Can any of you remember the last time you reacted to a news story like it was real? Edge of your seat, heart rate up, got to go tell people about it, triggered about it, worried about it, ordering ammunition or MREs? Because I don't recall the last time I had that kind of visceral response to a news story. I'm trying to remember, but it's been a while. Okay, the last one that truly shocked me that I thought might have been real was Christchurch. COVID didn't we were expecting it. You know, on Sunday night before 3/11, I had said in a podcast, World War III starts on Wednesday, 3/11, based on, and it's going to start in Seattle. So I said, World War III, a global conflict, will start in Seattle on 3/11, and it happened. How did we know? Predictive programming analysis. That's how we knew. I had said, if predictive programming is real, and again, I say if because we're working with the theoretical model. Even though it's our best explanation, I'm still open to new information. But if this is real, you can use predictive programming as a predictive model. And just as we predicted, 3/11 would have been, was ground zero for the pandemic, we also did the same thing for Butler, Pennsylvania. We were sitting there waiting for Trump to get the head wound on the right side of his face. We were waiting, watching, expecting it. With that level of specificity, the right side of his head, that he would survive. Thank you, Marcel. Appreciate it. Afterburner, Sovereign, Say What, Contrast Ratio, and Vanden have all received gift memberships. You know what that means? And let me go ahead and hand out wrenches to Say What and Afterburner. Means you can watch the new whiteboard videos as I post them. All right, let's continue here. I was just reminiscing about 2020. Like, this thing has evolved. We've always been skeptical, but we've also been open to the possibility that we could be wrong. And I always say fake until proven real if it's an extraordinary claim. But some things meet the standard to where maybe it's not super extraordinary. And Christchurch looked real, and it was shocking at first. But then it had all the normal hallmarks. There were concurrent drills involving the car bomb, the car being run off the road in a pit maneuver. And then the first scene, there was a magazine already on the floor. There were AVR, augmented virtual reality rounds bouncing out of, shooting out of the, ejecting from the gun. And then at the second mosque, you had dead bodies getting back up like zombies. You had a guy in this white muumuu and a Windex spray bottle filled up with theatrical blood spraying on people. And so the second mosque scene was so fake, and the first one was so CGI and squibby. This is where I first saw squibs. I'm like, why is it when he pulls the trigger, there was just like the way that the pile of rubber dolls in the corner reacted, it was like air was blowing up, like Charlie Kirk's shirt. Anyway, I did not know what squibs were until Christchurch. One of the greatest psyops to deconstruct, though, because it has so many elements to it. AVR, squib tech, the concurrent drills were a big part of it. And then you had a manifesto that referenced like Anders Breivik. And then also they used this. This is when I started to pick up on quarantining mind viruses. Because Christchurch is when they said, we got to ban BitChute in Australia. We got to ban 4chan. And anybody who distributes this video is going to go to jail. Lean Dion says 3/11 declared scamdemic. First reported case in the U.S. was 119. Yep, good observation. 119. 119 and 3/11. One of the shows I was watching on Netflix was Colony. Season 3, episode 11, they said, Seattle is going to be ground zero for the reboot of civilization. And what did they call it? The Great Reset. Reset, reboot, civilization, ground zero, Seattle. So we were making predictions based on predictive programming as a predictive model, which it is. And I've made subsequent predictions, and it's to the point where when I go to a movie, I will announce it. I'm going to go watch Sinners. And I'm going to watch this movie because based on the trailer, it looks like it's foreshadowing race war type psyops. So after Sinners comes out, well, Sinners is about the vampires all being Ku Klux Klan, racist white people. So you got these racist white vampires in Sinners. The main character, played by Michael B. Jordan, and he plays his own twin. One of the twins gets stabbed and dies in the arms of the other twin, bleeding all over the place. After the movie comes out, Austin Metcalf, a twin, dies bleeding in the arms of his brother in what was considered by Jake Lang, provocateur, and many of the right as a racist killing. So they try to turn Austin Metcalf into a white Trayvon Martin. So that kind of kicked off a sequence of racial-themed psyops. You had, was it Robert Hinton Jr.? What was the name of the individual he was killed by the cops, then his father went and killed a cop? Okay. Ohio father Rodney Hinton. But anyway, without getting into all of these, this was followed up by Shiloh Hendricks using racial epithets against a child on a playground. And then she gets a lot of money from Give, Send, Go or GoFundMe. Then you had the subway killing. Then you had even the Raja Jackson versus Psycho Stu, totally fake, even though some people I could name believe it was real, which is funny to me. But that event was also put in the context of race. And then you had, of course, the girl on the subway, and they called this White America's George Floyd moment, or BLM movement. So they started White Lives Matter last summer. So just to give you an idea, that movie set the tone for what was to follow, psyop-wise. Watching Wicked, I should have watched it back in November when it came out, because I watched it much later, but it's called For Good. And then when I saw the Renee Good martyrdom, it was very clear to me that these things are correlated, that the Wicked Witch is actually Antifa, and she's liberating the talking animals because they're being enslaved and they're being deported from Oz by the obvious Wizard of Oz as Donald Trump character. So she's actually fighting ICE when the movie opens up. So you have ICE protests, and you have the witch breaking up these soldiers, enslaving the animals. I mean, I'm just saying, For Good, Renee Good, and then even the Grammy Awards, the celebrities are all wearing the Be Good pin. Well, that actually ties into the theme of the movie, which made use of the word good in a very nauseating way, just so repetitive. But there's a song in the end, I think it's called For Good, where the theme of the song is the Wicked Witch describes herself as limited because she doesn't have any power to stop the wizard. But she asks Ariana's character, the Good Witch, you are unlimited because of your position and your privilege, you can make change. So it was an appeal to the Good Witch to take out the wizard and free the animals. Well, if you look at the Renee Good and Alex Pretty story, this was pretty much reiterated in a number of places. What you saw was an example of two individuals who are part of the privileged class stepping down and getting to the streets to save the oppressed. They were renouncing their privilege. And this was performatively done by these actors like Mark Ruffalo, who said, I could talk about my award here, but I'm going to instead, for the greater good, put my selfish interests aside and talk about what's going on in Minneapolis or in the Twin Cities. Jamarian says, watch and review, good luck, have fun, don't die. Yeah, if you want me to watch any movies, no matter how bad, if you think it has pertinence, I will do it. I will take one for the team. Okay, it's 2026. Time-traveling protagonist trying to prevent an AI apocalypse. Okay, I'm going to have to watch this. Let me bookmark it. Is it in theaters or can I watch it on one of these streaming platforms? The last one I watched was Atropia. If you haven't seen Atropia, it's about a 24/7 war simulation village populated by crisis actors. They even have a animatronic donkey and villagers, animatronics, squibs, blood bags, fake, rather crisis actors, but just the entire thing is fake. And it's in the middle of California to prepare the soldiers to go to war. Someone asked me today, how can they fake something like war? And one of the key concepts is compartmentalization and security clearances, and how information control is really tight in these environments. But one of the things I brought up was the use of dummy tanks, World War II, inflatable tanks. Then you have wooden surface-to-air missiles, you have dummy missiles, you have dummy bases, dummy ships, dummy planes. If you look at the role of decoys in war, you think, okay, this is Machiavellian. Like, power is not what you have, it's what the enemy thinks you have. Well, that might be Alinsky. But the idea is about perception, like Sun Tzu. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So you think, okay, they're just psyching the enemies out. They're tricking them. And I don't think that's what's actually happening. I think the deep faking that we see, that we've seen for decades in the military, wasn't to trick the other side. It's to trick the public as much as the other side. But in other words, it's not only to trick the other side, because at the higher up level, they're both in on this collective scam. So I kind of look at this whole thing as inherently based on simulation and war games. So it's very sublimated. But the theater of war has always been a part of war. And so you can debate as to how much is real, how much is fake. George Orwell wrote these interesting letters where he was traveling and he was noticing the accounts of war and how he would be in these places and there wouldn't be, here it is. I think it's in Revenge is Sour. Anyway, throughout his diary, looking back on the Spanish War, I got to find his notes, but he was talking about war propaganda and how there was a lot of inconsistency between what he experienced on the ground and what was reported. Or William Randolph Hearst, who said, you provide the photos, I'll provide the war. And if I remember correctly, I think JFK might have worked for William Randolph Hearst in some capacity. John F. Kennedy worked as a special correspondent for Hearst newspapers in the summer of 1945. So the significance there, of course, I'm just saying, William Randolph Hearst, you give me the photos, I'll provide the war. And then JFK as a war correspondent is also intriguing because in Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, the character Joker represents JFK. And this explains all the Oswald jokes and the target on the side of his helmet. Jamarin May says, it looks like you actually have to go to the theater. Well, I'm not really averse to that. The thing about theater, going to the movie theater, where you're inside of the black Saturnian cube, you get the full experience, the full brainwashing treatment. But I like going to the theater because I want to see what the trailers are. Because the trailers usually will condense the majority of the predictive programming messaging into a couple of minutes. So it gives you some foreshadowing. And I've noticed patterns. Like, this is a consistent thing where we're being barraged with similar messages across multiple movies. So, for example, when I went to go see Elvis, the opening trailer was The Rock. Have you seen the meme, the crack rock? So it's mean. But it's a really skinny version of The Rock because he lost 60 pounds for a role. And there's this conjecture that he's been wearing a muscle suit this whole time, like a bodysuit. And when he lost the 60 pounds and he's being lauded for this achievement, Glenn Close? He's on the cover of GQ because he's doing some football movie. No, not Glenn Close. Glenn Reynolds. Is it the one? What is the name of the actor who was playing the football player? It's like a comedy. Oh, Glenn Powell. So Glenn Powell is in Chad Powers. So you have this Glenn Powell wearing a rubber muscle suit at the same time that The Rock is talking about having lost 60 pounds. And I'm like, what happened? Did he borrow The Rock's costume? Was it some kind of a reveal? Because The Rock was significantly larger post WWE. And I thought it's entirely plausible that he could have been wearing a muscle suit all these years. But anyway, The Rock was in a movie called Black Adam, and I saw the trailer. So he comes down from the sky, he's got a lightning bolt on his chest, and he's this, this savior. And then it goes into the Elvis movie right after that. And The Rock he's a really huge Elvis fan. Elvis impersonators performed Elvis songs. So this all stood out to me as intriguing because Elvis starts out where he's a kid and he's wearing a lightning bolt around his neck. And he's in this like desert tent, this revival in the desert in a tent, and he starts getting possessed and dancing, and he becomes Elvis. And then he goes over to, it fast forwards to where he's working for the Crown Electric. But the symbolism of Elvis, the lightning bolt, The Rock, the lightning bolt, it all kind of synced together in an interesting way, especially if you get into the symbolism of Black Rock and the Black Cube, and Elvis, of course, the rock star. There's a correlation with rock star and the idea of the Black Rock Cube, the actor, the rock star. There's quite a lot that in the subtext is pointing to something here. The idea of somebody incarnating or falling down to earth, like Lucifer, or the angels falling down, the fallen angels, the stars becoming matter. So anyway, just basically suggesting here that the trailers for the movies tend to reiterate a lot of the symbolism. When I watched the last Final Destination, Bloodlines, the trailers were from like Thunderbolts, and in that one, and then Fantastic Four, which had destruction coming down from the sky. Both of them had explosions with space needles. You can see the space needle or space needle-like structures. And I thought that's an interesting, consistent pattern because the movie Bloodline, Final Destination, starts off with the space needle being destroyed. So going to the theaters is slightly more revealing, I think. One of the things we need to do is we need to break down movies by categories relating to specific topics. Like there's a number of movies that relate to fake moon landings, like Fly Me to the Moon, that are worth evaluating. And then the actress in that one, Scarlett Johansson, is in a movie called Asteroid City, which also has a lot of fascinating, intriguing implications for this world stage concept. One of the repeated themes I've seen in movies, and it's even in Game of Thrones, is the Red Witch, the Scarlet Witch. The idea of Red Witch, Scarlet Witch, the Scarlet Woman in the Babylon working. This has been featured in a ton of movies recently. And something else we were talking about when Oppenheimer came out is right after Barbie came out. And if you get into the Barbie movie symbolism, you're actually looking, if you ask me, and I can make this case, you're looking at the introduction of the new goddess, the new age goddess. So in the new paradigm, the Aeon of Horus, the goddess is now Babylon. So I have this article called the Horror of Babylon, the Pink Mass. And it's about how they mainstream this new goddess archetype through this doll, through idol worship. And it ties into a couple of things here, because Margot Robbie is in Babylon, which is actually based on Hollywood Babylon, which was a book written by Kenneth Anger, who is not only a Thelemite, connected to Crowley and the Church of Satan, but he's connected to this concept, this Thelemic concept of this new goddess. So it's kind of interesting that Margot Robbie is in Babylon. So that actress has been portrayed in several movies. He was also in Suicide Squad, which connects to Jack Parsons in a weird way because he was in the Suicide Squad, the club he was in that were working on dangerous materials to build rockets with this solid rocket fuel. But there's some dots to connect here, and it connects these overarching stories of this new paradigm being introduced, and it correlates with very specific actresses and actors where they're playing the same archetype in multiple movies, and it's pretty consistent. Margot Robbie is just another one of these that's worth looking at in this context. We're mapping it all out, and the reason why is it puts on full display the intentionality behind all of it. These are not coincidences. These are not random examples of just typecasting. There's a specificity here. I call it archetype casting. And I have many examples of it. And also, and I alluded to this in the last whiteboard, if you look at any world stage persona, like a Trump or a Musk, and their entertainment counterparts, there are consistencies in their counterparts, movie to movie to movie, that also belie a certain intentionality beyond coincidence. One of the reasons why I was so, last year, critical of people dismissing everything that we're talking about as coincidence is that these are people who are cognizant of predictive programming. They know about conspiracies and fake news. They know about all the fake stuff. But by dismissing this as mere coincidence, we're denied these otherwise very shrewd thinkers. Like, they're not part of our club. And we could use that help. We can use more. We need minds. We need people who have seen through media fakery to get involved in this off-world stage concept, fleshing it out and helping it to expand. There needs to be a separate platform. There's no reason to continue to mix in with the brainwashees. There's no reason to be triangulated, to be turned into a loosh cow. Jamarian says, do you ever wake up and think to yourself, how did I get here? Many times this place seems like a large, open, insane asylum. Yeah, pretty much is. I mean, I don't know. Did you sign up for this? I don't remember, but that might be part of it. I can't say for sure, but I can't say that because my life isn't terrible, that this place is paradise, because, of course, not everybody's having a great time. But on the bright side, I do think this is hell. Like, if there is a hell, this is it. I don't think it goes any lower. I mean, I guess it could. Like, if you never figure it out and you recycle and you come back a little, what do you call it? Signal loss, maybe each subsequent life. It's like a copy of a copy of a copy. Maybe after a few times you just wear out and you just become an NPC bot. I don't know. Maybe people do lose their souls. I think it's concerning that there's 8 billion people and that the numbers have grown so dramatically in just recent decades. I think it concerns me because it means that the architect, the demiurge, is trapping more than ever. Can't make them, can't create them. So where are these new souls coming from? Well, maybe there's a limitless source. It just means that nobody's, or very few, are getting away, or more are arriving than are escaping. And if the new arrivals arrive here in a completely controlled paradigm that spiritually castrates them, then they have no hope of escaping. So the numbers are just going to grow, and they're likely going to be swayed over to the dark side. And that's ultimately what's happening. The black mirror is the hoodwink. So if you don't know what the hoodwink is, and it's not just in Freemasonry, it's in pretty much every secret society that I've examined closely or participated in, the initial ceremony is You're brought in with a bag over your head to symbolize that you're coming from a world of darkness, ignorance. And then you swear you're not going to tell. And if you do, they can rip your guts out. Once you make that agreement, your NDA, they take the hood off. And now you see the 3 lights, 3 candles, and all these people around you with costumes, maybe swords pointed at you, depending on where you're at. But the idea is that you've been shown the light and you promise not to share it with the people outside. You know, it's like in the Olympians, in their fire, the myth of Prometheus. The gods of Olympus have the fire. Man is in darkness. Prometheus runs up the mountain, steals the fire, gives it to man, and he gets punished. So if you're joining these clubs, you're brought in there to not be Prometheus. Like, yeah, you can share our light, but you can't let it out there. So you have this deliberate creation of an enlightened elite and the endarkened masses. So the darkness is by design. And the people today live in a state of darkness. And darkness being ignorance. And the ignorance specifically with regard to the worldview and its constraints and the lies it's built upon, the lies that are consistently injected into it. And it's ultimately because you have it's not a wool sack over your eyes, but the black mirror may as well be a wool sack, because you are looking at the world not through a opaque black bag, but through an opaque screen. And as long as you believe the frame of reference it gives you, you will always be in the dark. Holly World War says hello from Treasure Coast, Florida. Thank you for joining. Here is your blue shield and blue wrench. Jamarin May says, it reminds me of the beginning of Maze Runner. They go through a chute and appear in an unknown land with spider monsters. The only thing they have is the community of others that are also in the same place and situation. You know, there's a very gruesome set of sci-fi horror films called Cube. It's like Cube, Cube 1, Cube 2, Cube 3, Hypercube, Precube. And it's about these people who wake up with total amnesia. They don't even know their own names. And they wake up in a cube room, and it's like an escape room. They got to figure out how to get out of it. And so there's a door on the floor, the ceiling, and the 4 walls. So there's 6 doors. And they open a door, the first person does, and some horrible booby trap kills the person. They freeze, they burn, they get chopped up. It's horrible stuff. And so the rest of them, you know, try to survive, and they go to the next room and the next room. And they don't know how they got there. They have amnesia, and they don't know if they can trust one another, because now they're like captives in a series of cubicle rooms. Well, you find out later in the series that these people were working for the government, and they got involved in some project, some deep underground base, and it's a giant cube. And it's very bizarre, very twisted, but the idea of being in a room with a bunch of amnesiacs, you don't know anything, you don't know where you came from, and you're in some kind of horrible matrix symbolized by a cube where one wrong step and you're dead. You can't trust anybody. It does seem very much like an allegory for incarnation. I seem to remember how it developed. I think towards the end, it got a little more revealing about the whole point. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I just remember how gruesome it was. And I think I used to really be into like horror movies and these gruesome flicks. I don't know why. And I think I also internalized a lot of the misanthropia. Like, we're supposed to be misanthropes. You're supposed to hate man. You're supposed to think that man is a walking, talking tumor, a blight on the face of Mother Earth. We're an accident to biology. We're horrible and hateful. And that's because the black mirror, it's like a funhouse mirror. It gives us a distortion of what we are. We're just animals. The religions do it too. The mortification of the flesh, sin, condemnation for being born in sin. You're guilty, shame. Yeah, you're a shameful, low-life animal beast that can't regulate its own passions. So you're demonized by religious paradigms as much as you are by the scientific paradigm that says that you have no soul, no purpose, no point. You're just an ape with a big ego. So the traditional and progressive paradigms are both misanthropic. I consider myself a humanist. Like I don't like their God constructs. I think their God constructs are masks for government, and it's a tool for oppressors to claim a divine mandate to dominate. Ms. L says, "I was too. Now I can't watch them." Well, I think it's desensitizing us to death, violence, etc. I kind of got sick of how in so many movies it seems like the gun is a character. And watching The Walking Dead, I got headshot fatigue. Like, how many times did you see somebody's head blow up? And it's not that I get sick or nauseous. I just think it's uncreative. Like, killing people is easy in films. That's probably why a lot of independent films might just use violence. But as a writing, um, as like a script writer or from a writer's perspective, I think it's less challenging to just do destructive stuff than funny or insightful or intriguing. But I don't know, to each their own. I happen to think a lot of the first person shooter games were conditioning people, like predictive programming, for the epidemic of mass shootings from Littleton to Parkland. I mean, they kind of toned down the mass shooting hysteria. It kind of peaked with Parkland. And nobody cared anymore. And that's why I think they did the plot twist in 2022. And now the shooters are all satanic Antifa, trans, anti-Christian, Reddit radicalized shooters. And now the right cares. Mazel says, I'm going to watch Nightmare on Elm Street this weekend. Yeah, well, look, something too, I think there's a quality of movies that that we saw, like with these classic or more these older slasher films, that they kind of robbed in the new versions. Like the original clown from It, Pennywise, was funny and twisted. The new one's just a dumb monster. I kind of feel like the same thing for like Freddy Krueger. There was a lot of puns. He was funny. There was a lot of irony. I mean, it's not like he's lovable or something. He's still this grotesque human being who was burned and turned into this thing. But I don't know. I think it was a lot more artful. And I saw a remake, a newer version of Freddy, and it didn't have the same soul. But I'm also finding how when I watch older movies that I watched a long time ago, they don't hit the same way. Like, they're pretty terrible, objectively speaking. I think that no matter what our criticisms are of the world stage, I think everything entertainment-wise has in fact improved in quality. Jamarian May says everything is gore now. A lot of it's context, because there's a lot of gore in HBO The Boys. A lot of people blowing up. There's always like guts flinging everywhere, people covered in blood, and it's always done in a very comic book way. So it's not shocking, it's not gross, it's funny. Like, you wouldn't think it's funny to watch the same character always getting doused in blood and guts from other people exploding, but it's actually comic book like, so it's not that bad. It's really context. And I had this theory about gun violence in movies, because a lot of the actors who play action heroes who are all about guns are anti-gun in real life. You know, speaking of, you remember the Batman shooter, James Holmes. So Dark Knight Rises is premiering. He goes in and he shoots up a theater. The audience was watching a trailer for a movie with Sean Penn. And it was, I think it was called, it was a gangster movie. Gangster Squad. So Gangster Squad opens up with these mobsters coming through the movie screen and shooting up a theater. That was the trailer they were watching before James Holmes comes into the back door and then shoots them up. So what do you call that? An eerie coincidence? And then down the street, I think it was like Rocky Mountain Medical Institute or something, there was this school nearby doing a mass casualty simulation for just such an event. And I think there was a victim at that event who survived a shooting in Canada a few weeks before. We got to okay, that's something I got to write down. We have to do this. We have to look at the repeat actors. So the people who like, I survived this event and I died at this event, or he survived these school shootings, they went over here and they got shot here. That's a huge tell. That's a big giveaway. For example, 50 of the Las Vegas shooting victims went from Vegas to Thousand Oaks, California. And they went to the Borderline Bar and Grill 13 months after the Vegas shooting. And while they're at a country music thing, they get shot. So 50 people from one event get shot at another event. 2 country music concerts. Same 50 victims getting shot at again. Well, that's an eerie coincidence. But then you add on down the street from the Borderline Bar and Grill Thousand Oaks shooting, down the street, there was a mass casualty simulation going on, a drill, a concurrent drill. And the drill involved 50 crisis actors. So the exact number of people at the bar were over here doing a drill. And what was the drill based on? A concert shooting. This was reported as an eerie coincidence. The media noticed it. I have receipts. It happened. A drill, real event, same victims from a previous event, the drill based on the previous event. So how do you put that together? Well, it suggests to me that the drill was probably not meant to be reported on because the bar and grill was the drill. Hilariously, they had a video of the inside of the shooting, and it's on CNN. I think it was Wolf Blitzer, and he's like, it's very graphic. We're going to show you what happened in the shooting, but don't look. It's so graphic. So I'm watching, the camera pans, and there's nothing. You hear some noise in the back, but there's nothing. Okay, now, one of the heroes of the story, I think his name was Brandon something. He was like a Marine. He claims he used his belt and put a tourniquet on a victim. He had no blood on his hands. And I think he also saved a life in the Vegas event as well. But we got to look into these repeat actors who go to multiple events. These ones that are just extremely statistically anomalous, impossible. These statistical impossibilities. We need to document these separate. Mizell says they're also playing The Shining. Okay, so next time you watch The Shining, the scenes to pay attention to. The owner, manager of the Overlook Hotel looks like JFK. That's probably significant because it's Kubrick. But aside from the Apollo stuff, there's a scene where Danny is on his tricycle and he's zooming down the hallway and he sees the twins holding hands. The twins symbolize the Twin Towers. So he zooms past them, and then it cuts to a scene where they're dead on the ground, cut open. There's a fireman axe and an overturned chair. Looks very 9/11-y. Like with the metal from the building sticking out. The fireman reference, obvious. And the twins with their midsections chopped up. So that's that scene where Danny goes down the hallway, and then he's in this room, he's throwing darts. So throwing darts reiterates the projectiles, the airplanes. And he's throwing darts in a room that has a phone booth. It says Bell. And then you have the twins next to that holding hands. So the significance here is that you have at ground zero, you've got the Twin Towers and then you have the Bell building. Let me see if I can pull that. I have an article that actually breaks down everything from The Shining. But my point is, and I think even the two elevators, the blood coming out, there's a few things in there that foreshadow 9/11. The follow-up to The Shining is called Doctor Sleep. And Doctor Sleep is by, again, Stephen King, Metascriptor. Doctor Sleep has a character that predicts 9/11. So that's Stephen King directly injecting 9/11 into this thing. Stephen King's latest thing is called The Long Walk. And he promoted his new book, which is about these people who go on this game show type thing where they have to walk down the road. Military's behind him, these army guys with tanks. And if you fall below 3 miles per hour, they kill you. And the character, the protagonist, is number 47. So Stephen King, Trump deranged, is walking down the road with the 47 around his neck. And what does that mean? Well, they say that can't be a reference to Trump because the book came out in 1979. And I'm thinking, well, if he's a metascriptor, then he could easily have been given certain clues or symbols to put into his books for future reference. And I thought, what's the symbolism of it? Is it that 47 is a dead man walking? That was my take. But again, Stephen King, 100% metascriptor. Anybody who produces content, books, movies, or otherwise, that directly relates to the psyops, the fake events before they happen. If your work as a movie producer, movie maker, director, writer goes into the theaters and predicts a significant historical event, like you're some kind of a prophet, yeah, you're a metascriptor. You've been given some plot lines. You've been given some specific characters or names to put into the media ecosystem through your propaganda vector. The Shining has Jack Nicholson typing all work, no play, make Jack a dull boy. And the word all is spelled A11. So the idea is Apollo 11. And the theory behind it was that he was talking about having to keep a secret from his wife. And he can't tell her what he's up to because it would endanger her. So some took it to mean that Stanley Kubrick was revealing that he was under some kind of contract and he wasn't allowed to talk about what he did in Apollo 11. So some mistook this as he's revealing, like a whistleblower, that he participated in the hoax. Some will say he did the same thing with Eyes Wide Shut. I don't think you can make that case. Eyes Wide Shut also had hints that Kubrick didn't die when they said he did. Duet Celeste says, when journalists warn about shocking or graphic images, that's a potential hoax code. Yes. Yeah, it's a fascinating tactic that they use here as far as the strategy behind it, because nobody wants to look at massacres. So you tell them to look away. Well, now they just automatically believe it's real because they don't want to look at it. So it's kind of clever because now they're diehard believers, but they didn't actually see it. And they don't want to see it because it's so grotesque. But if you're not willing to look at it, do you have enough information to know that it's real? You don't. So it's kind of like, if you're not going to look at it, I don't care about your opinion about it. If it's too hard for you to look at, then why are you opining? Low information belief is not as good as informed disbelief. And I don't call it informed belief because if the information supports it as being true, then you know it to be true. And we have to keep the distinction between knower and believer foremost here, because that is fundamentally what defines the world stage or perspective. They're believers, not knowers. They're followers and believers, not seekers and knowers. Right, let's continue here. I wanted to go through some of my Twitter posts. Wolf said, "How did Charlie not realize this was a political marriage? I don't think she was ever in love with him." People are so terrible. This guy says, I mean, how can she be attracted to Charlie Kirk physically, to be honest? He chose the wrong one. She was a plant. My point of it is, all these people are falling for the trick that Erica Kirk was a villain and tricked Charlie and got him killed on purpose because it was part of a plot. And what they don't realize is that this is a planted narrative that presumes that Charlie Kirk is actually dead. It's a perfect guardrail. I coined the term guardrail before it was being adopted by AI platforms, the guardrails they put in to control it. I coined the term guardrails to describe the conspiracy theories that prevent conspiracy theorists from finding out stuff is fake. So instead of saying Charlie's not dead, the whole thing was fake, Charlie was fake, and Erica's fake, instead they're given Erica's fake, and she killed Charlie. So that's a conspiracy theory that doesn't subtract the essential story as presented. It just adds some extra detail. We take, again, the subtractive route. We subtract what we can't verify. We don't say, oh, I can't verify this, so let me add some extra conspiracy theories onto it. That's the wrong direction. But on our list of hoax indicators, we'll have to put that graphic warning. Do not look. The more hoax indicators that we have, the better moving forward. Since we can no longer rely solely on the visual deconstruction, we need to have other ways to determine if something's reasonably likely to be fake. Like, we can reasonably make the case this is fake. We can make the case with certain hoax indicators, context, the presence of concurrent predictive programming, political agendas. There's a lot of ways we can say, I have reasons to think this is fake. I'm not going to believe it at face value. And we need a list of these things, because those who have until now, and probably still now, rely on grinning crisis actors or terrible cinematography and obvious fake special effects, that is not going to work, if it works anymore anyway. But as we immerse ourselves deeper into this deep fake simulation with generative video getting better and better, you can just assume you're all going underneath the hoodwink. You're all going to be blindfolded moving forward. I refer to this concept as the blindfolded skeptic. I could describe to somebody, like, let's say we're in an elevator with a bunch of people, too many or something, or the elevator goes dark, power's out, and we're isolated, stuck in a dark room. I could convince the room that nobody died on 9/11 without having to point at CGI planes, because they won't agree. They'll say it looks real to me. Without having to point to any video content at all, I can lay out the groundwork and then explain the concepts from which I can say nobody died on 9/11. But if you're relying on, oh, look at the video, it's obviously fake, look at the CGI, that doesn't work, because the normies are going to trust what they see. They're gaslit. They're not going to go against their programmer's basic framework. At best, you'll have conspiracy theorists who will say all these people died and it was George Bush and Israel and the Skull and Bone Society. So they'll agree there's a conspiracy, but it's a guardrail because it does not subtract. It assumes the deaths are real. Of course, people get mad when you tell them that nobody died, and they would probably kill me in the dark for saying something like that. I mean, I've had people do that. I've had people threaten to come punch me in the face 23 times because I don't believe that Psycho Stu got punched 23 times by Rajah Jackson. Now, nobody's threatened to shoot me in the neck yet for saying that Charlie Kirk didn't get shot in the neck. But anyway, I can point to many examples of people who are like, oh, you don't believe that horrible thing happened? Well, then I want to do that horrible thing to you. Like, what kind of insane cult are these people in? Okay, I'm trying to be mindful of, Kirk fatigue. It just happens to be a perfect example. It's an exemplary psyop, and it's worth studying. It's the JFK of this generation. William Cooper explains 2001: A Space Odyssey. William Cooper, and I'm going to retweet this. It's a 30-minute lecture, and I think you should watch it. Again, William Cooper had Q clearance. He produced the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in his book. He reproduced it. So, he's a standard truther of his time. And you can't believe everything he says because his framework didn't include media fakery. Was he a disinformation agent? Probably. But I don't know. There are times where it seems like he went off the rails because his breakdown of 2001: A Space Odyssey and of space travel in general goes against the grain. Because generally, conspiracy theorists believe that there's a secret space program and aliens on the moon and NASA's covering up more stuff. They don't believe that NASA is faking it. Well, William Cooper, he says, 2001: A Space Odyssey is filled with hyperbole, metaphors, and archetypes of the ancient mystery Babylon religion and mystery school teachings. Extremely relevant here. 2001: A Space Odyssey also has 9/11 predictive programming. 33 years before 9/11, there's predictive content in Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. His Behold a Pale Horse is kind of a classic, I guess. A lot of useful information. And I've learned a lot from people I consider to be agents, shills, limited hangouts, because you can find a lot of good research and just forget their conclusions. Some of the best research into symbolism, I think, probably comes from, and I think he's a preacher or something. I know he's a radio host, Tex Mars. Fortunately, he died in 2019. Radio host, he ran 2 fundamentalist Christian ministries. So anyway, even though he runs these Christian ministries, I found his research to be top notch. And he put out a book called Codex Magica, Secret Signs, Mysterious Symbols. And it was essentially a compendium of all the symbols that we look at and some of the best breakdowns I've seen. Codex Magica, you can probably find it. Now, again, he comes from this perspective of like satanic panic and all that stuff. But regardless, if you're just interested in the research and the meaning of the symbols, Codex Magica is a good one. Plus, it's a huge like phone book size thing. I think it's better than scrolling through an ebook. But I'm going to check out this William Cooper tonight. I'll probably do a review on it tomorrow. If there's anything I missed. All right, well, I'll be live tomorrow. I got to work on a few projects, mostly these ebooks related to the squibbing of Charlie Kirk. And there's quite a lot happening. I'm not sure if Rihanna's assailant was real, if her house was really shot up, or if it's just promoting her new album. If you're a member, you can check out the new whiteboard video. I probably have to do about 5 or 6 more to get the whole picture. And then what I'll do is I'll organize them into a single video and I'll put some more work into the production. But I'm just getting the basic whiteboard concepts out there, the essential infographics, in order to map out the internal Truman Show, which is in fact an invisible prison. And I'm displaying the compartmentalization that makes it possible. And we have decompartmentalized, we have deprogrammed, we are the unconfused. And I think it's important to reject the anti positions as we reject the pro positions and just adopt non. Non is acceptable, it's defensible, and you shouldn't be peer pressured into taking sides anyway. My feed is full of demons and exorcisms and Candace Owens talking about magic and Freemasonry and sacrifices and pentagrams. Like, this is really being hyped up. I suppose it's a lead up to the alien invasion. Also, 311. 311 is coming up, and for the last few years, a fakeologist, John LeBon, and I would get together and talk about 311. I don't know if we're going to do it this year. I'll reach out and see. But I plan on doing some kind of 311 hoaxiversary. And then later on 310, I'll be live with fakeologists at like 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. Anyway, thanks for your comments and participation. I'll see you all in Discord. If you want the link to Discord, go to ips.monster. I'll put a link below. And I'll put some links to the things that I discussed in the context of tonight's conversation. This deconstruction project does have a lot of room for other people's ideas and contributions. Some of the things I want to do is I want to group together all the films with a Gnostic subtext. All the actresses portraying this Scarlet Woman, Red Witch archetype. I want to start grouping together a lot of these themes and see what we can extrapolate from it. I've been taking the findings, the research, all the PSYOP breakdown forms, and putting it into Notebook LLM. And it's quite revealing. I think it's going to be very useful using AI, getting receipts, fine-tuning our mind maps, and demonstrating unequivocally that these are intentionally engineered coincidences. There are no coincidences on the world stage. If it appears to be a coincidence, it was probably scripted, planned, and made to appear that way. But the explanation that, oh, it's all just a coincidence isn't good enough. We can agree it's a coincidence. Our real debate here is, are we looking at intentional or not intentional? And if you look at the preponderance of what we have brought forth, what we've documented, what we're continuing to systematize, it's not coincidental. And that has significant implications. And it's going to dawn on people eventually as this thing moves forward, because the facts are on our side. And we've rightfully diagnosed what we're looking at. The world stage construct encompasses all the conspiracies, which is a way of keeping all the free thinkers in a cul-de-sac. And it's more important now, I think, than ever before to get off world stage, because you're going to be subject to the visual illiteracy, this black mirror hoodwink that's completely opaque. You will no longer be able to rely on just your sight alone to see through it. So if you want to have a wider perspective to be able to discern these things from a third eye perspective, or from a metascript perspective, you really have to get off world stage. And this is where it begins. Have a great evening.